Welcome back. Well, many reasons have been advanced by the Egyptian government to maintain the emergency law. It has always claimed this law is essential to prevent terrorist attacks. Yet the deadliest attacks in the country took place while the emergency law was firmly in place. Back in 1997, more than 60 tourists were killed by Islamist activists in Luxor, one of Egypt's top tourist destinations. Many years later, another tourist destination, Taba, was hit by 3 bomb attacks. More than 34 people were killed. 88 people were killed in a series of bomb attacks in 2005 in Sharm el-Sheikh, and the attack was the deadliest in the country's history. As recently as April 2006, 3 bomb attacks hit the Egyptian resort city of Dahab. 23 people were killed, mostly Egyptians, and 80 were wounded. Well, still joining our discussion are our guests in Cairo, Majid Rida Boutros, in London, Robert Springborg, and now joining us also from London in this part of the show is Sarah Lee Whitson. She's the Executive Director of the Middle East and North Africa Division of Human Rights Watch. Ms. Whitson, if I could start off with you in the second half, if you could give us the big picture of the situation of human rights in Egypt. Do you feel that this emergency law has been abused and exploited by the government over the years?
Absolutely. The primary purpose of the emergency law is to stifle the freedom of the Egyptian people and to ensure that the Egyptian government keeps itself in power. The only beneficiary of the emergency law is the power elite of the Egyptian government that keeps itself in power by making sure that nobody else has any power, any freedom whatsoever.
Mr. Boutros, you would be one of those elite that our guest is referring to. How would you respond to that?
Now, the parliament, Egyptian parliament, has accepted and enacted such a law. If you are talking about 66%, this is 2/3 of the Egyptian parliament as the elite, well, I approve with you. It's enacted by the parliament, by the representatives of the Egyptian people, not the elite. I mean, I have to correct this. This is very important to note.
Ms. Whitson,
the elite did not enact the law.
Sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Boutros. Ms. Whitson, do you believe that any anti-terror law that might come in to maybe even replace this emergency law might just be the emergency in disguise?
Absolutely. I mean, the early drafts of the new counter-terror law that have been circulated in the public domain indicate that its provisions are likely to be prohibitive, perhaps not equally as prohibitive, but certainly prohibitive enough that gives us a real cause for concern. But I wouldn't want to comment on any new counter-terror law until a final draft was actually added. But as for Mr. Boutros's point about the Egyptian parliament approving it, it's a bit of a farcical statement given the fact that there is really no independent political opposition in the country with sufficient representation in the parliament to, in fact, contest the law that was handed down to them. And also note that the Egyptian parliament was given all of 1 day to review and approve the emergency law measure. Whatever edifice or charade of legislative democratic review Mr. Boutros might want to offer up is not one that's going to persuade anyone, since we all know that there is one majority monopoly party in the country and no real legitimate legal opposition.
Let's bring in Robert Springborg. Mr. Springborg, earlier you spoke about the contradictions and the hypocrisy of Egypt. What about the United States, which is Egypt's biggest backer? Last year, the United States gave $2 billion, almost $2 billion to Egypt in terms of aid. Do you think that the US would still prefer the current Mubarak government to maybe a future Islamist-inclined government, maybe led by the Muslim Brotherhood?
Well, if it's that stark choice, I suppose the answer would be yes. They would prefer the status quo. Preferably, it's not that stark choice, and there are other alternatives. But given the fact that there's very little space in which political opposition can operate, it's only really one that's quasi-underground, such as the Muslim Brotherhood, that has a chance of operating. So the way to resolve the problem is to open up the political space, to get rid of the emergency laws and various other means by which opposition political activities are made risky for those who engage in them. And by doing so, create a much broader political system in which lots of forces are reflected, and then you can have an effective democracy. Unless and until that happens, you're basically this sort of Hobson's choice between an authoritarian incumbent government and the Muslim Brotherhood, which could conceivably be just as authoritarian. So the Americans don't have a good choice here, but then nor do the Egyptians.
Yeah, but do you think that it's quite revealing that they've turned a blind eye to this state of emergency being extended? Some would argue if it was any other country, the United States would be crying foul.
Well, it's also fair to say that the Bush administration has itself transgressed quite liberally on the human rights and political rights of its own citizens and of individuals around the world. Since the global war on terror was launched, habeas corpus, the right to trial, all these things have been encroached upon by various aspects of American administrative acts as well as legislative ones. And so the United States is not well positioned to take a principled stand against the extension of the emergency law in Egypt. There are other countries that are, but it's also true to say that there has not been a howl of protest here in Europe about it, as indeed I think there should have been.
Sarah Lee Whitson, are you concerned? Are you worried that there hasn't been any international condemnation of this?
Absolutely, I'm concerned. I mean, perhaps people are getting bored and tired of really what's just the same old thing. Yet another broken promise by President Mubarak to revoke the emergency laws. Yet another broken campaign pledge to give Egyptians the freedoms they deserve and are in fact entitled to. So maybe there's listener fatigue. But the United States and Europe absolutely have a duty. The United States in particular, to the extent that it's financing and funding the government to over $1 billion a year, to say to its partner in the Egyptian government, this is no way to treat your people.
Majid Reda Boutros, what about this U.S. pressure on Egypt? You are part of the government. Is there pressure for democratization?
Well, let me state a fact first. Egypt is a sovereign state. The decision of Egypt is made by the Egyptian people, not a foreign power, especially when you are talking about unipolar system. This unipolar political system does not allow United States or entitle United States to interfere in the internal affairs of Egypt. When they have a concern or express their concern about a violation of human rights, they have a bad record of violation of human rights themselves. Amnesty, Human Rights Amnesty report and other human rights report have indicated several violations of human rights in the United States and most of the governments worldwide. So if I am enlisted in the Amnesty report as a violator of human rights, so I cannot talk about human rights violations in other parts of the world, even if I'm entitled to. Now, Egypt is, again, I'm stressing Egypt is a sovereign state. It's governed by the people. Their legislations and political decisions are made by its own people and will not allow any comments by others in its internal affairs.
Let's get a final word from Sarah Lee Whitson. There's not much time left on the program. We've seen the government very successfully quell dissent recently with the Mahala workers. The police got in there before the protest even happened. Are you convinced that so long as the Mubarak government is in charge, the opposition and anybody in Egypt won't be able to properly protest?
Well, I think people are willing to protest, but they recognize that they have to pay a price. They have to pay a price by going to jail, by being tortured and abused by the Egyptian government and its security forces. The brave and courageous activists in that country, I don't think, are going to give up, and I commend them for their determination and steadfastness in the face of such an oppressive government whose representatives deign to speak in the name of the Egyptian people. Really, it's embarrassing, and I don't even just know how to respond to Mr. Boutros pretending that this emergency law has anything to do in the interests of the Egyptian people.
Ms. Whitson and our gentlemen in Cairo and London, thank you very much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story, Sarah Lee Whitson, Majid Rida Boutros and Robert Springborg. And thank you, the viewer. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.